All right, welcome everybody. Good to see you here. It is 6 o'clock and I am a punctual fellow. I am Andy Johnson. I'm one of the facilitators of the International Literacy Educators Coalition, or ILEC. Tonight we have two special guests who are going to do some discussing, but a uh, up front, we say that the views of our guests are theirs. They don't represent any school district or any organization. We say that for their protection. And they may not represent the views of ILEC. They represent their own views. So, two people, Kimberly Hughes and Paul Parkerson. I'm going to let you introduce yourself and tell us who you are and what you do at your school district. Let's start with Kimberly.
Hi, I'm Kimberly Hughes. This is my 14th year in education, and I work at right now as a pre-K teacher, but I've had various roles in education. I've worked as a kindergarten and first grade teacher. I've worked as a literacy interventionist and a district literacy coach. And then I've also worked as a cohort leader for the Texas Reading Academy. And then I also have two young children personally who are in elementary school at this time.
Very good. Paul.
Yes, hi. I'm Paul Parkerson. I have been teaching, I've been a bilingual teacher for 20 plus years. And in the last 10 years, I've been an interventionist slash coach, if you will, working with elementary grades. But during that time, I managed to finish a PhD, and now for the last couple of years, I've been doing that and also adjunct teaching at one of the universities here. So I have literally one foot in the elementary classroom and another foot in the higher ed classroom, and work with students that wish to become teachers and are working on certification. Yeah,
Very
and
good.
my gist is bilingual education.
Okay, thank you. And both are from Texas. That's important to know. All right, let's jump right into it. And again, we are going to open it up for questions or comments. I'll even open up the mics at the end. So tell us about the impact of SOR, Science of Reading legislation, on your sense of agency and your ability to make decisions about or for your students.
I'll say, personally, when I remember I was a first grade teacher at the time that a lot of the news articles started coming out. And I was trained in reading and writing workshop. I went to the teachers college and so that's what I use with my students. And I remember thinking at the time how surprised I was to hear all of this just because about teachers and how they were teaching reading and writing because in my own classroom, I always taught phonics, even when I went to be trained at the teachers college. I mean, that was always a part of what I was doing. My students always made really good progress. And not only that, but they, fell in love with reading and writing, which set them up for success, in future grades. But so around that time, I switched roles and became an interventionist. And that's also when I started taking some classes and starting my doctoral program. But what I noticed when I switched over to intervention and literacy coaching, then my role became a lot more confined. There was a lot more of a focus on skills-based instruction. To the point as an interventionist where I was working with groups of, kindergartners, first graders, second graders, and we were just focusing on, phonological awareness or phonics and just, doing those skills on repeat. But those students weren't transferring what I was teaching them into their reading and writing. And so what I started to do was trying to incorporate my background of using more multifaceted literacy instruction. And so I added to my interventions, interactive writing, shared reading, reading in small groups, just adding that authentic, meaningful connection to literacy so that students could make progress. And so I feel like, and even as a literacy coach, my autonomy was kind of it was narrow because the district really wanted me to focus heavily on that explicit and systematic phonics instruction, which we know is important, but we also know, is not the only part of literacy. And so I found that what I was able to do with teachers when I was trying to support them, what was a little bit narrow, and I didn't feel like when I had that role in particular that I could go as deep as I needed to, just because of what was expected of us and what was expected of the teachers.
Mm. Yeah, I would have to agree with you, Kimberly, because I think that seeing it in the context of the classroom, what became more and more apparent was this idea of this list, this checklist that just was this tyrant, and teachers were the teachers that I worked with were literally only listening to me when I was like in the interventionist slash coach role with half an ear because they were more concerned with ticking their boxes and well I have to follow this. And so Dr. Johnson, you mentioned agency. I think that's where it really, that autonomy of feeling like, hey, you went to school, you were trained, you have an education, um, we're going to trust you to take this curriculum and administer it and teach it and adapt to the students in your classroom, which I think we all agree is never a homogeneous unit that one size fits all. So that idea that some sort of science of reading would offer us a box that you opened up that would fit and fix all of dyslexia, not a problem. Dysgraphia, not a problem. Gaps, not a problem. And I think it wasn't for me. It wasn't until I really dug into um, some of the politics and ideologies behind what fuels a lot of that. Which I mean, we could talk about that in terms of like neoliberalism, and we could talk about it from the form of capitalism, who's trying to make money, the districts, the states, the federal government, who blah blah blah. But the upshot is that the students did not receive, did not in what I saw, did not get that same approach that they might have if the teachers weren't so just stressed out about meeting all these quotas and following all these sort of like patterns and infrastructure. And as far as me being a classroom teacher, I mean, I believe any teacher recognizes that there's an element of I'm going to kind of pick and choose what I feel is going to be good versus what necessarily, it might be status quo. And that's always been the case, because that's what I think attracts a lot of us to education, is that these kiddos are going to have our fingerprints on them, and different teachers teach in different ways, and that's okay. Different kids learn in different ways, and I think that's the contrast, that's the comparison that I'm seeing, this one size fits all kind of mandate versus this sort of organic, human, messy approach to education.
Okay. Kimberly, you mentioned systematic phonics. What is that? How do you understand that?
So the way that I understand that is teaching phonics in a way where you're building from the least complex skills to more complex skills. And so you're doing it in a way to build off what kids already know, and to take them, to more conventional reading and writing. And so and the explicit part, of course, is directly teaching those skills, as opposed to them just, exploring them or it being embedded into meaningful experiences.
So systematic, is that the same as direct instruction or is that different?
No, it's different. I think more of systematic as kind of the order that you're teaching things, and helping, build on those easier skills, and adding more complex skills and concepts over time.
Paul, can you add to that? Systematic phonics, how do you understand that?
Yeah,
Systematic instruction.
I agree with you. I would just say that in some ways, I think that when laid bare, the systematic approach tends to lean more towards what we've always been told is not the best practice, which is teaching things in isolation. I think that what Kimberly is referring to as what would be the better way is that there's this dovetail, this embedded approach that relies heavily on context and not necessarily like this, one bullet point, two bullet point, three bullet point, 4 point A, 4 point B. That again goes back to that idea of, well, have you done the first 3 units? Versus where are your kids? And it even sort of contradicts that the notion of formative assessment in some ways.
Well, and
So
I
go ahead.
Oh, well, I was just going to say, one other thing about systematic phonics, there's also different orders depending on, what curriculum you're using. But also, when I taught first grade, I really looked at you have the curriculum and what you're supposed to be teaching, as a grade level. But then I also would dig even deeper and do things like spelling inventories to look at where individual kids are.
Mhm.
And so I think you can also think about systematic in that way, where you're looking at where is this kid, and where is this kid over here, and they might need different things. And so, you have one kid who might just be hearing the initial and final sounds and words, but you have a kid over here who's already hearing and writing, long vowel sounds. And so how can you as the teacher be responsive to that and teach them where they are and what they need? And so I think sometimes that is in conflict with what we're hearing in terms of science of reading with this one size fits all curriculum. And I know as a district literacy coach, we were supposed to go in and tell teachers to teach the phonics curriculum with fidelity. But, when I switched over to intervention, following that, I remember sitting down with a first grade teacher who was really struggling to understand how to help one of her students. And so I helped her, give a spelling inventory and collect some writing samples. And we really looked at what that student can do and where they were. And I remember that she, something that really stuck with me is that she told me, no one's ever showed me how to do this before or how to ever look at what kids can do in this way. And it kind of opened her eyes to that, this one test that gives this, one number is not it, that we can go a lot deeper.
So the International Dyslexia Association talks about systematic and the logical order. What is the logical order? And is it the same for everyone?
I would say no. I mean, the first thing that popped in my head a minute ago when Kimberly was talking is I remember maybe year two of teaching when it suddenly dawned on me, oh, wow, some kids learn how to write before they learn how to read. And going, no, that what? No, that's not the way it's supposed to be. It should be the other way around. Again, not necessarily thinking of it in any sort of like cognitive way, just thinking of it in sort of like this mindset of what is supposed to be. So I would argue no. Now, does a curriculum need to follow an order in the respect of being able to cover a certain amount of material? Sure. So there has to be some organization, but I think implementation doesn't necessarily follow the same order per se. I don't know. What do you think, Kimberly?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. I do think, it can be helpful, especially for teachers who are newer to have some type of organization and some type of system to follow. I think where we get into trouble is if we stick to that regardless of where kids are and what they need. I do think there are, general characteristics of our language that have a certain complexity. And so it's helpful to know what that is when you're teaching. So, for example, it's kids tend to get their initial and final sounds before they get the medial vowel sound, or digraphs and blends tend to be more difficult for them. But I would hesitate to say that that is the case for every single child, because I'll have kids even now in pre-K who are starting to add in digraphs into their writing, even though if you look at it systematically, they might not technically be there, but it's something that maybe they've been exposed to in their environment and their language experiences and interactions, and that's something that that particular kid is already ready for.
Yeah.
So there's no logical order is the most simple to more complex, but there's no specific logical order. I mean, does everyone need to follow the same logical order? Does everyone need to get consonants before vowels, before digraphs and trigraphs and diphthongs? Help me understand that complex thing. Bossy R's, syllables, CDC. Help me understand this thing called
Okay.
logical order and curriculum.
Well, I think that any teacher will tell you that the the order in which knowledge is acquired, the skill set that is acquired, the way that students um, are able to demonstrate mastery in particular areas does not follow the same pattern. So, by that logic, you can't argue um, that it needs to follow that order. But again, like I said, you also can't just say, well, we're going to spend the next school year just willy nilly letting people do whatever they want. There has to be a semblance of what is required in order to meet certain criteria. And I think that what tends to happen then in my wheelhouse is that then you have to talk about expectations. What are the expectations? That my student's going to come home and be able to read and write, or that my student is going to be able to pass a standardized test that says he can read and write.
I don't think any teacher in America advocates higgledy-piggledy chaos, random. I think everyone agrees there's an order. But help me understand. I want to get back to this. They talk about fidelity and teaching the program with fidelity. Kimberly, if you don't teach with fidelity, are you an infidel?
No, no. And that I feel like that's really the big problem that we've come up against. And part of the reason that why this year I went back into the classroom and I'm teaching pre-K, because I feel like this year I'm able to have more autonomy and able to teach early literacy, early childhood, the way that kids should learn, with meaningful experiences where they can have those connections. And what I also found as a literacy coach when we were talking to teachers about teaching with fidelity, is we had a lot of teachers that that was problematic for, because they had a lot of experience and a lot of knowledge, and sometimes well, a lot of times they felt like they weren't able to use what they already knew from research and from their experience that worked really well for kids. And now what we have happening in our district is 10 of the elementary schools are using a completely different curriculum. And these are the schools that are lower socioeconomic schools, are schools that have higher populations of emergent bilingual students. And those teachers are having to use a strictly scripted program where, most of their teaching is whole group instruction. I've heard from teachers in those schools that they don't have a whole lot of time to do small groups, or to do even things like writing workshop that we know is so important for kids. And so yeah, I have a problem with that word.
Here's a question that one person asked. Based on your experience, what's one of the most positive changes that the SR Science of Reading movement has brought about? And the negative change. So let's start with a positive, both of you. What's one of the most positive changes that you've seen with the Science of Reading mandates?
Well, I'd say for me, in in the schools that I work in, and being a cohort leader for the Texas Reading Academies, I will say it has brought up a lot of good conversations, in schools and with teachers about the best ways to teach kids. And so I think those conversations have, some of the time been very, very helpful. And then, the Texas Reading Academies, even though I will say as a cohort leader, there was a lot of pushback from teachers, but there was some good content, especially for teachers who didn't have as much experience yet. And so I think in that sense, that was positive in just the term in terms of just bringing it up to more of our professional learning together.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree that the Reading Academy has been, and of course, I mean, let's be honest. Most of us are teachers. Teachers, we love to complain. We you're going to get pushback on anything. But I feel like that sort of, well, we all got to do it. And in case anybody maybe is wondering what we're talking about, we're basically talking about a graduate level course that discusses literacy in the context of what all is involved, and also with some hands-on approaches and a bunch of resources, and really kind of an opportunity to step back and go back through the process of understanding what all has to take place for a student to learn to read and write and be able to move forward academically in an educational learning space. And so, as we all did that, I think it would. You said it, Kimberly. Good conversations, because I remember certain teachers kind of going, "Dang, I'd forgotten how much how it's just God's own little mystery that anybody learns how to read, and there's this thing that happens, and at the same time, oh, I'd forgotten about that, and
So it's
so
the conversation that takes place that you find helpful.
absolutely.
Has it been an
So
open conversation? Are you allowed to disagree?
I, I mean, but at the end of the day, like you said it, if you're labeled an infidel, it it equates with, oh, you didn't teach with fidelity, or you are science of reading agnostic, or whatever. I'm not sure how you would what you would put, but sure. I think that for us, at least in my little neck of the woods, the gist of it was we all realized there is a whole lot of things that come into place, and there is literally, and so I think in some ways that was almost antithetical to the science of reading mandate, to say, hey, there's not one size fits all. No way. No way.
Kimberly, conversation or one way dialogue? One way. Tell me about the conversation. Is it a conversation if you have to come to a predetermined outcome?
I mean, in that sense, I would say no. I mean, I feel like I've been fortunate to work with people and supervisors who trust me, and who are open to those conversations with me. I don't think that that is the same or the case across, across all schools and across all districts. And so I think, that can be problematic when the conversation stops. But as long as it's allowed to be a conversation, then I think that's how we can learn from one another, because it is so multifaceted. I mean, there's not all kids are different. They learn to read and write in different ways. They have different experiences coming to us into schools. And so, we really need to be as experienced and bring all the knowledge that we can into to trying to teach them and be responsive to them.
So, in the state of Texas, and I know this is a generalization, would you say there's conversations taking place in which people with different perspectives on reading instruction are allowed space to state their ideas?
I mean, I would say as a whole, I haven't felt that way. I mean, I think about some of the policies coming out about like the high quality instructional materials, and what schools are allowed to choose for their resources and things like that. I mean,
So let's unpack that word. What is high quality instructional material? People use words like direct instruction, systematic instruction. I think we must unpack some of these words.
I
What is
think.
high quality? That's one of the words.
Wait, say that again, Dr. Johnson. I'm sorry.
What is high quality reading instruction or instructional material?
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I think the first thing that pops in my mind is how much during my tenure as an educator the term best practices gets thrown around. And I saw my I saw a really, really funny Dilbert comic. If you're not familiar with Dilbert, it's humorous, but they're in a business meeting or a staff meeting or some sort of meeting. And he says, well, if everybody uses best practices, then that's the definition of we're all mediocre. And it made me laugh because I realized what you're saying. You have to contextualize these things. Why is that high quality? Why is that something that what is the word we like to use, effective, achievement, uh, and again I think we are talking about managing expectations. What is the expectation? I think most educators that I respect agree that a year's worth of progress is the expectation, regardless of what you're teaching, as you know. But at the same time, you said, what is high quality? I think the science of reading would have us believe, at least a lot of the mandates would have us believe, if you follow this formula, you're going to get whatever expectation you're looking for. But if
We
you don't
still
get
don't
it,
have a clear idea of what high quality instructional material is. I'm a simple man. Can you help me understand? I'm not very bright.
well, I mean, if you look at the policy, then what the policy would say is that it is materials that have systematic and explicit phonics instruction, materials that do not have any mention of MSV, meaning, structure, or visual cues. And so those are some of the things that are on the checklist when they're choosing what curriculum is high quality.
Explicit instruction. Is there anyone who favors implicit instruction? Isn't all instruction explicit by definition?
um, I think, I mean, in terms of that dichotomy, you might say yes, because I think that there are certain things that do happen implicitly. But as far as instruction goes, I think we try to be transparent about that, mainly because we want we want to be convinced that we're making our best effort. So, but there are many things, like Kimberly was saying, when you do an inventory, when you do a formative assessment, when you evaluate, there is evidence that supports the notion that, oh, that was already there. That was not explicitly taught by me. So did they learn that implicitly, or did they already know that? Is that background knowledge that they brought? I mean, I can't necessarily answer that. So I don't know. What do
Someone
you?
wanted to know more about formative assessment.
Oh, more about formative assessment. Okay.
How do you guys go about what can you say about formative assessment and inventories? Kimberly, you mentioned that.
Mhm. Yeah, so I mean, as far as the inventories go, I mean that's something that it is done, you could do it 3 times a year, but it's really giving students a list of words that are more complex than spelling patterns as you go. And so you can really determine what students know and are able to do in terms of their phonics knowledge. But in terms of other types of formative assessments, I mean, there's a whole range of things that you could do. It can be as simple as keeping track of different writing samples and noting their progress. It's kind of I like to think of it as more of an ongoing type of assessment.
Agree. I would just add a formative assessment is something that doesn't necessarily take a specific form. It can be something that the teacher uses to um, basically take the temperature, like, okay, what's going on here, and just evaluating. It could be a running record, uh, and the evaluation is not fluency. Maybe the evaluation is decoding. Maybe whatever is being determined. There can be it can be more specific in the sense of the whole class is going to do this, or it could be a small group. But again, I would argue what Kimberly was saying, the antithetical, I'm saying that weird, antithetical idea of going against that science of reading mandate would be to, oh, I'm going with this small group and we're going to do a formative assessment on this. I'm going with this other small group and we're going to maybe do a formative assessment on this. I'm going to, as the person in charge of all of that, determine what information I can use to determine then what I'm going to teach. So I don't know if I just muddied the waters or not.
So formative assessment is as learning is forming, but you're using that then to decide what to teach. Is that correct?
Yes.
In some ways, yes.
So if you have advanced readers that are reading 2 or 3 above, how does your instruction change? How do you differentiate between your high ability readers and your struggling readers?
I mean, I think that's a big question just because there's a lot of different ways that could look depending on the specific needs of the learners. And, especially if we're talking about struggling readers or writers, you'd have to, I would want more information about, what exactly are they struggling with. So, for example, in their small group, we might do some word work. We might then connect it to a book that we're reading, and then do a little writing about it. But it'd be specific to what they need. If I have students who are reading a few grade levels, above where they need to be, then we might do more, I could still do word work with them, but it would be, at their level and what they need. But then our conversation would probably look different about the kinds of strategies and word solving that they're using, the kind of comprehension questions would be different.
Does Texas have an official state textbook program adoption process, or is it up to local school districts?
I think right now they leave it up to independent, to individual districts. But I know that several, like the service centers that Texas has, are doing work that is, I believe, trying to homogenize that. That might be a bad choice of words, but trying to like streamline that a little bit, specifically to um, address that. Uh, I I I don't know. There's a side of me that thinks that they might be moving that way, and then there are times when I feel like they're not. But officially, no. Right now, Texas does not have a one size fits all.
What do you see as some of the impact on your students of the science of reading mandates? What have you noticed about your students? Or have you noticed anything about your students?
I don't know. I've got to be honest with you, Dr. Johnson. I I sort of view it as something that I compartmentalize, and it's almost like STAR is the acronym for our state assessment. I feel like I compartmentalize a lot of that, and I tell myself I teach in spite of these things. So I think, yeah, the difference in some ways there's positive in that I think teachers that perhaps did not have a very good or rigorous approach to language arts have some more tools. I feel like the vast majority of the lower grades, though, I feel like they feel like they're chasing their tails, and so I don't know that instruction necessarily is getting. We throw a lot of words around like grade level, rigor, achievement, but I don't know. That would be a hard question for. I would have to really analyze that one at the to think, is SOR really impacting students individually, which is a good question because ultimately that's what matters the most.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree. I think that's a difficult question to fully answer. I mean, I will say changes that I've seen directly impacting students would be some of the materials they have access to. So, for example, with the heavy push for decodables, I see a lot of decodable books now in especially kindergarten through second grade. So that has had a big shift on what small groups look like and the types of books that students have access to. The other big change that I've seen is just the way that they're assessed. I know, in our district, for example, instead of teachers pulling students one-on-one and doing running records, now in second grade and up, they do it. Through the computer. And so basically, the kids will wear this boom microphone and they will read passages that the computer gives them. And it gives them three different passages and it gives them a score. And while, on the one side, it's very efficient. On the other hand, though, teachers aren't sitting and listening to each student unless they go back and listen to the recordings, which of course, with technology, sometimes there's issues with that. But then the formula is based on the sympathy of reading. And so, those are the results that teachers are getting. And so I feel like, and for younger grades, they're doing, more skills-based assessments like reading nonsense words and the letter fluency. And so I think in that way, I've seen some shifts in instruction. So like I've been in classrooms where teachers are teaching students to read nonsense words when that's really not the intent of that. That's just meant for the assessment. But now students are being taught how to read nonsense words in their classroom. And then just from a parent perspective, my daughter is in first grade. And so one thing that I noticed with her is in kindergarten, prior to going into kindergarten, she had great experiences in pre-K, and she really learned to read and write because she's very socially motivated, and so she would learn the letters of her friends' names because she wanted to write about them or write letters to them. But then in kindergarten, she goes through these assessments. And it flagged her as needing tutoring, and part of that was because with the letter fluency. She wasn't saying them fast enough. And so she had to go to tutoring. Well, she had a really great teacher, who may have taught differently than me, but all things considered, she did have a good year. But just going through those tests and that additional tutoring, what I found was last summer, she didn't want to read anymore. She didn't like it at home. Anytime she got a word wrong or felt like she was making a mistake, she would just shut down and she stopped doing it. And so, I mean, it's hard to say how much of, these mandates had anything to do with it, but I do know that she's had a lot heavier phonics focus in her classroom. I'll ask her, "What books did you read today?" or "What did you write in school?" And she's like, "Well, we didn't read any books today." But she'll bring home, her phonics workbook. But she'll tell me, "I don't want that. You can just put it, you can just recycle it." Fortunately, this year she is doing great. She loves reading. She writes all the time. But I from the parent perspective, that's something that I've observed.
So pick up on that affect, motivation, emotion. Those are important parts of reading. Your daughter didn't want to read. Your daughter associates reading nonsense words and phonics What can you tell us about the impact on students' affect, motivation, and emotion?
Well, I can give you, and Dr. Johnson, you're familiar with this because we've talked about this before, but I have three children that trust me. Since they were zygotes, I've taken them to the library. Like reading has been a big part of our lives. Now, my oldest is 22, my middle one's about to turn 21, and my youngest is 16. And by the time they got to high school, all three of them were not interested in reading anymore. And I mean, the kind of thing that just makes me, as a bibliophile, just go, what happened? And I can't help but believe, whether it's science of reading, whether it's science of reading mandate, whether it's just the neoliberal trickle down effect from that, whether it's standardized testing, I believe it's this from what I've researched with my own children. I've shown you, teacher, that I can read this text and answer questions, and you want me to do it again. And I've already showed you I can do that with a poem. I can do that with fiction. I can do that with nonfiction. I can even give you certain, even more specific things, but you continue to pick things I'm not interested in reading. And it's really interesting because you guys know what I'm talking about, these curriculum things that are given to districts. Wow, this will really, your kids are going to love this. It's a highly interesting text. I beg to differ. The student needs to be able to pick what that is. And my own children made it very clear, I am not interested because I'm never allowed to pick what I want to read. I'm always told this is what you're going to do. Now, I realize we're talking high school, higher level, but I think Kimberly's point of her daughter sort of connects with that.
No,
Kimberly,
I would
you,
agree with
you
you.
go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I would say motivation is a huge part of it. I mean, at home is the only time that no, my son's a little younger, but still it's the only time that they're able to choose books that they want to read and that they're interested in. And so they do that on their own. She does that on her own now. She'll pick books and she'll read them to her brother. And then the same with writing. I mean, at home, she is writing poems, she's writing songs, she's writing cards to people, she's writing lists and stories. And then at school, I mean, she even told me yesterday, she's like, we're learning how to use an exclamation point. She's like, why do I need to learn how to do that? I already know how to do it. And so, being able to write a complete sentence is what she's doing at school. But at home, she's been writing, since she was 3 years old. It's just, it's of course grown as she's grown, but that choice is not available to her.
So the only time they're able to choose what they want to read is outside a school environment.
Not necessarily. There
What?
are supposed to be within, like, for example, Kimberly, if you're thinking like, the units of study, for
Right.
example, there's an incorporated time there where here's a library, students are encouraged to pick the books that they want. So there is sort of a tip of the hat to that. But I guess as things get more like, as there's more teeth in the assessment, meaning, oh, this test really means something, that lessens more and more. I do have to add, though, so as to not be all doom and gloom about my own children, they've come full circle. They have now embraced reading again, rediscovered reading and writing as well. So there is a happy ending, but they did it outside of school. So yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think there is some level of choice, and I also think that differs, based on the teacher. But like my daughter, she gets to go to the school library, and they get to pick out books to check out there. So she gets to choose that. I mean, in her classroom, she just tells me she reads one book every day. And so I think there's a little bit of choice, but I agree. I think what I see as students get older is because of the assessments, there's even less time for things like that. and especially not as many opportunities as I feel like kids need in order to really be motivated.
So what happens to that kid whose parents don't have the time to sit and read with them or don't have access to books, who never gets to choose their own reading material? Do they ever fall in love with books?
I sure hope so. There's a side of me that tries hard not to think about how that part of them will probably wither up and die. Yeah, I just never really was much of a reader, you know. I hope that's not the case. I do believe in teachers, in the sense that I do know that there are enough teachers that will say, okay, I've got to follow the script. Oh, okay, I've got to do these boxes, tick off these checklists. And they're like, but we're doing a read aloud that I chose, and the kids are really into it. So I do have hope that there is an opportunity, a chance
Mhm.
somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. That's a very scary thought. But I have seen, like you mentioned, Dr. Parkerson, enough, teachers who get to know their students well and who recognize that need, and their passion can ignite, the students in their class, passion for reading, and for writing.
One more question, and then we'll open it up to our studio audience at home. To what extent have teachers of reading become test preparation coaches and not reading teachers? I know that's a leading question. I admit that up front.
Um, in Texas, I would say, yeah, we go right to that because what demonstrates your fidelity, what demonstrates your ability, what demonstrates your credibility, what makes you legitimate as an educator are your scores.
Mhm.
So do the math. If 95% of my kids do really, really well, then clearly um, I'm a good teacher. If 50% of mine do really, really well, man, you must not be implementing the program with fidelity. Man, you must be skipping some steps. Man, maybe you're, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I know in our district that the interventionists were even told after spring break to stop their intervention group so that they could see star tested grades, and work with kids who were taking the state assessment. So there's a big push for the assessment.
Do you know if the state assessments are they norm referenced or criterion referenced?
I think they're norm referenced.
Mhm.
Okay. So if they're norm referenced based on a normal population and you prepare your students for the test, aren't you making it obsolete? Then it's not a normal population anymore if you're preparing one group for the test.
Well, I mean, if we could extract the political from it, which is impossible, then perhaps we could approach that. But I mean, considering the state does this, they give the test, they look at the results, and then the passing rate is determined. That sort of speaks for itself.
But a norm
I
reference test looks at a normal population. If you are preparing a subgroup, that is no longer a normal population. So by definition. All right, let's open it up to see if our guests have anything to say. Any comments? You can raise your hand. I will even let you speak your question if you want. Or you could type them in the chat or in the questions. Do we have, okay, Sharon, go ahead. You can talk, Sharon.
Okay. I have some strong opinions, I know. Um, I really appreciated listening to Kimberly talk about how, you know, interactive writing and shared reading. Um, that was me too. I've taught for 40 years in the public schools, and I'm now a literacy consultant, and I've done all of it, special ed, everything. Um, and I've always been amazed by how these phonics programs, especially the ones now, are so too intensive. And they're kind of making all of the kids do it, whether they need it or not, or whether they're ready for it or not. And so, like, if you're saying, okay, let's focus on OW right now. Some of them aren't ready for it, some of them don't need it. It's just completely a waste of time for kids, and that makes them hate reading. So, which is why I developed the thing that I developed just by trial and error called Rhyme Magic that Scholastic published, because you just kind of do it for 5 minutes to everybody, and then they get what they need when they need it, and it's just simple. And I agree with what you were saying, Paul, about they do write before they read. I mean, anyway, I just mostly want to tell you that I'm really glad that you're having these conversations, and I hope we can keep having more of them.
Thanks, Sharon.
I
Yep.
would like to know if I can contact Kimberly or Paul ever. Is there a way to do that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
If
So
you're
maybe,
comfortable, you can put your address in the chat box. Bess has something she wants to say. Bess, you are open.
Oh, are you referring to what I said earlier?
I see you raised your hand, so go ahead.
No, actually.
Oops, Bess, let me try it again. Okay. All right, Bess, there you go. You should be good now. Bess, are you still there? Okay.
Okay, do you hear me?
Yes, I do.
Okay, I'm so sorry. I was wondering if you, the speakers or anyone in the audience, has noticed that the NAEP scores have fallen, and that it's based on more current science of reading methodologies. And when this occurred during the balanced reading and whole language eras, they blamed it on whole language and balanced reading, but now they're coming up with all kinds of excuses for the fact that it's not showing any improvement in reading. So we've been through these conversations for decades and decades and decades, decodable books, phonics, and there has never been any evidence that any of it works. And even now, when there's evidence that it might not be successful, nobody's paying attention to it. That's what is bouncing around in my head right now. It's not really a question, but if you want to respond, I'd be interested.
Well, I would say that I feel you, because I think that there have been many. I'm thinking back to, I mean, I'm a nerd. I'll be the first to admit it. But I went to this symposium and I remember it clearly because they were talking about some research that Collier had done on bilingual education. And it had been 7 years that they'd been doing this research, and they finally had some results, and they presented these results. And we were in this audience, and we were all just like blown away by what they were sharing with us. And he got up, he was at the podium, and he said, "Now, if this was any other place, like pharmaceutical or automotive industry or law or any other silo, not education, this would revolutionize everything. Things would change, things would explode. People would be like, whoa." And really, what happened is quite a few people became aware of it, but he was right. It didn't really change anything systematically or in any, and sadly, I think that's what we kind of have to deal with in education, is that the wheels of progress, if they're moving at all, move so slowly, it's almost unbearable sometimes.
Kimberly, anything to add? It's okay.
No.
All
Yeah.
right. Adelphio, you're up. You should be able to talk. There you go, buddy.
Oh, okay, thanks. Um, this is mostly for Paul. And Kimberly, if you can just chime in whenever you can. Um, I know you said that you're a bilingual person, and
See,
I'm very familiar with Collier and all of that. And what is your experience in Texas about most of the students who translanguage, who do not have the phonemic background that is all English? We have a mix of all of them because we have mixed generations, mixed languages, and everything else.
mm-hmm.
And we also have other languages as well, and even indigenous languages in between. So when they impose, and I use that word, impose the science of reading to be used, how do you two deal with that?
I mean, honestly, the best I can tell you, Adelphio, is I try to disrupt where I can. Being very much a highly, what's the word I'm looking for? Very much wanting to promote critical literacy. I feel like translanguage is huge. Translanguage blew my mind when I finally understood what it was. I think most bilingual or multilingual people have translanguage in their soul, even if they don't know they have it. And so when that awareness finally becomes obvious, and if you're an educator, you're like, whoa, this is huge. And so in some ways, translanguage is one of the most amazing things. I remember going to one of my professors and going, well, somebody needs to tell TEA, our education agency here in Texas, that they need to get their heads up. They need to wake up and give standardized testing in both languages. They need to allow the student to pick which language they're going to use, or both. Or they need to be able to, because they're not showing what they really can do. And I mean, most of that, sadly, falls on deaf ears, or ears that really, like myself, can't do anything macro, but we try micro, if that makes sense. And so, yeah, that I try all the time to address that. Hey, your idea of what's going to work in English, hate to tell you, but Spanish is different. Sorry, the vowels only have 5 sounds: a, e, I, o, u. It's all based on syllables. So this is very different, people. You can't just transpose them and assume it's going to all work out. But it's a big subject. So I don't know if I even scratched the surface of your question. I don't know.
Well, and I would say from my role doing intervention, I've seen it the most, just in terms of, so the first school I was an interventionist at, there were over 32 different home languages there because we also had refugees. And so what was happening is with a lot of these assessments, as you mentioned, they don't account for all of these different languages. And so all of these students were being flagged as needing intervention. And so what I tried to do, like you use the word disrupt, I tried to do that by really talking to the teachers and the administrators about the issue, but also talking with the teachers who, because of these assessments and these mandates and curriculum, tended to sometimes, and this is not across the board, but sometimes because of what the assessments were showing and then the pressure on them, would sometimes use this deficit language with, oh, this kid is low or this kid is struggling. And I would say, well, hold on, let's look at what they can do, because they're speaking a completely different language and they're bringing a lot of strengths into your classroom. And so just kind of shifting that perspective of, well, let's look at what they can do, and not just look at this one assessment. And I think that really helps to disrupt the narrative.
And Kimberly, to piggyback on that, I think most teachers, most educators, once that has been brought to their attention, they kind of do a, oh, oh, oh. And so I think sometimes the tendency is to get real down and negative and think, oh, it's this fist fight. But truly, I think what we're looking at more is educating educators, and having that opportunity to pause where people can process it. I mean, let's face it, people, our educational system moves at a pace that is so rapid we can't even breathe, and we're trying to teach students, how to do things, and we're not even given time to stop and process and discuss and converse and adapt. And I think when we are given those spaces for PD or for community, it's super rewarding and very valuable, because you have those moments where you can go, yo, these aren't 10 kids that have major issues. These are 10 kids from 10 different places. And yeah.
All right, Kimberly, the last word is yours.
I mean, I will just say that, despite all of the changes and things that have happened over the years, that even being back in the classroom now, that at the end of the day, kids are still kids, and finding ways to engage them in authentic and meaningful learning. And I think that is the most important thing. And so that if we can continue to have, more open conversations about what works for kids, then I think that we can all learn, from one another.
All right, Paul and Kimberly, thanks for adding depth and dimension to this conversation. We appreciate you. And people, thank you. We'll see you another time.